All right, good morning. I generally don't put videos on unless I think they add value, and I think this one will. I mean, it's just a quick development since the last video. But turns out, I had the vintage saddles on that, which I'm thinking now is a 65 Strat, 65, late 65. But also, I put a link in the description of photos that I had posted way back on Strat Talk in 2010, trying to get help on identifying this guitar, which we'll go into in just a second. But the more I looked at those photos, and I'm glad they're on there, not the greatest photos, because back then we didn't have good cameras, but I think it's a factory finish. And everything's pointing more to where it's a 65, and somehow they got a 62 neck, which is marked special on it, if you go look at those photos. Either way, what happened was I was playing the original saddles yesterday, and a lot of people have said, well, I still prefer the original Strat saddles, but they just weren't doing it for me. They were kind of thin sounding, and I'm going, man, what? This guitar just is still a little thin, not as much sustain as the other ones. And then I realized, I said, that's those saddles. The saddles are thin, and they sound like they look. Either way, I just happen to have two, actually I had three. I put one on there, and I'll show you. I had three 11.2 millimeter sets that I had taken off of my other guitars, because it turned out if you have a semi-narrow neck, or you're getting close, if the E's are getting close to the edges of the neck, the 11.2 millimeter, which are these, will tend to push those E's out a little too close to the edge. So I had the Relic set, which I'll show you in a minute, which I put on the red Strat. I was willing to shave them down to 10.8 if they didn't fit. Well, there's not a bit of spare space, and I'll show you that, but they fit. And they play great, and I got the sustain back. So when I say I don't believe in changing the design of Leo's original design, that's the one exception, are these saddles. And you see everybody swearing by them online. And I know why. Well, I may be one of the reasons, but yeah, they just have more sustain. That groove gives the strings a solid feel. I don't know how it does it, because the strings don't move on the vintage saddles, but either way, it just felt like home when I put them on here. And another thing that I absolutely have to do now is get the raw vintage springs. And I don't know if you guys know Sam Simmons. He works at that famous music store in London. He had asked me, he said, what's the tip on running 5 springs? Because I can't do it. They just, it's too tight. I said, you got to use the raw vintage. He put them on a few days ago, and I posted it in my story on Instagram. And he wrote back and said, man, I love these things. Thanks so much for the tip. So I'll show you why I absolutely have to get the raw vintage springs now, even though this has I've got it right here, I'm just keep looking at it. This has vintage springs in it, but when I look at them, I think this guitar may originally had 3 springs, and somebody bought 2 way back when, who knows when. It came with 5 when I got it, but they don't look like they match exactly. So these, and I'll post a link to the video that I did where I measure the tension of different brands of springs, like the Fenders and the Gotos and the Callahans. I did a couple. And I remember that these were a little bit tighter than my 64 vintage springs. And the raw vintage are actually have less tension than all of them by a hair. So I put the 1038s on this guitar because I couldn't play the heavier strings anymore either. It felt weird. And I kind of see what Hendrix was talking about, well balanced. It didn't feel right with the 10, 13, 15, and then all of a sudden you got these fat strings on the end. The 32 and the 38 just make them feel more balanced. And so I put them on here, but the springs were so tight and not as tight as some of the new springs, that when I started backing out the claw to get this thing to float where I wanted it to float, the screw actually came out. So there's no threads left. So I'm absolutely forced to get the raw vintage, which I've already ordered. But that's where some good vintage parts pay off. And also, if you guys want to meet Mark Foley, there's an interview that one of my buddies, Richie with Fret Junkies on YouTube, worked for him. And I don't know if he still works for him, but he was actually helping him wind his pickups over there in the UK in Cromwell. And he did an interview with Mark Foley, and I watched it, and that was pretty interesting because I didn't know who Mark Foley was, but you can Google it, Mark Foley on Fret Junkies. But all right, let me get to the details, and I'll show you why, new vintage correct parts can actually save the day. All right, here's what we're dealing with. First of all, this is the chrome 11.2 millimeters. And here is the 11.2 relict. And, they're not rusty or anything. They're just not shiny like the chrome. But where you get the issue is there's so much, it's so tight there, but these fit perfectly. And when you get over here to the E's, some guitars, you might end up pushing these out just not off the edge, but a little bit too close to the edge. This is still playable, no problems. So that worked out great. I don't have to grind them down. I didn't really have a good way of grinding them anyway, so that worked out. And like I said, you can see that I barely have any float. That's the screws all the way backed out. That's all I can get out of this thing. It's not much. And I really want to float it a hair more because I think these old plates, they're really designed to be floating because you can get a kind of a thump. It's not doing it right now, but you can get a little bump there. And I think that's because of the front edge that sits on the screws is angled, I think, to where it's better if it's floating. I mean, Fender recommends quite a bit of float. I don't know if I can. They recommend almost that much, but I like to get it about there, maybe just a little bit more than I have now, and I can't do it with those springs, so we're going to do that. But that's it. I think these saddles are a great improvement, and I've got Villanova done. I just have to fine tune it a little bit from Maui, and I got my new camera. That's what you're looking at. I can now do 4K. This is just out by Zoom, and I'm praying that this thing does the trick. I just like point and shoot, and this thing is cool. I can do 4K, which is kind of tough to download or upload to YouTube. Takes forever, but I'm just hoping that it does the trick. There's the lens. I can point and shoot, get a good sound. I don't have to use the flips, the old flips for audio, and this for video. But this, you can get 5 or 6 different mic capsules. You see it's a stereo XY mic on there. And I'm just hoping it'll pick up the room sound. And then I can also, I'm going to be able to add an SM57 in here, and I've got a couple other mics that might work. But that's the first one I'm going to try. And I can actually see myself now. That was another thing. So anyway, hopefully there's an improvement here. Just keep your fingers crossed. All right, talk to you guys later.